Hello and welcome to The Untold Past. Since the birth of our YouTube channel in the summer of 2019, we've been lucky enough to explore many of Britain's castles. We've been to world famous fortifications, but also to some rather obscure ones. We closed out the decade by visiting some forgotten ones too, such as Conisbrough Castle and also Fotheringhay Castle, which to many people just look like a hill in the middle of a farmer's field. Castles can provide you with a fantastic day out, inspire the minds of children, but also transport you to an age far long ago. You can also tread in the footsteps of kings and queens, and also visit sites of brutal actions and extremely important historic events. Since we've visited many different castle sites, we've decided to give you a short number of recommendations. The buildings on this list are extremely interesting, beautiful to see, and integral to the story of Britain. In this list, we take you through 10 British castles you must visit in 2020. Remember, if you do enjoy these videos, please support the channel by subscribing. Number 10. Lincoln Castle. Lincoln Castle was constructed during the times of William the Conqueror and is a hugely impressive structure. Sitting on top of Steep Hill in Lincoln and standing adjacent to the mighty cathedral, its historical importance isn't overshadowed by the once tallest building in the world. The castle at Lincoln today acts as a reminder of law and order. Inside the walls you have a remarkable castle, which is one of only 2 castles in England to feature 2 mottes. Also present is the remarkable Victorian and Georgian prisons. Once inside, you can walk in the footsteps of murderers and criminals, exploring your way around a separate system of prison management. The prison chapel here perfectly shows the point of the separate system in which all prisoners would remain isolated 24/7. One of the biggest attractions to Lincoln Castle is the fact it houses the Magna Carta, one of history's most famous documents. The Magna Carta is a Charter of Rights signed in 1215 by the infamous King John, which challenged the authority and autocracy of the king. Today, parts of the Magna Carta are echoed in the American Bill of Rights and also the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If this isn't enough for you, there is also a superb medieval wall walk which takes you around much of the castle's towers and ramparts. Number 9. Windsor Castle. Windsor Castle is known for its long association with the English and British royal family. It is also known for its rather spectacular architecture. A castle originally was established in the 11th century on the site, and today it is the longest occupied palace in Europe. Henry III built a luxurious royal palace within the castle, and Edward III would develop this further. The grand set of buildings would become the most expensive secular building project of the entire Middle Ages in England. During the Tudor times, Henry VIII and Elizabeth I would continue to use the castle as a royal court and as a place to entertain diplomats. Windsor would go on to have a number of huge renovations throughout the Georgian era, costing a huge expense. During the Second World War, it was used as a refuge for the royal family from Luftwaffe bombing raids. Today, it is Queen Elizabeth II's favourite weekend retreat and boasts a number of huge royal suites and rooms, with the walls adorned with spectacular artwork. Recently, St George's Chapel that sits on the site of Windsor Castle was the site of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding, which attracts a huge number of tourists to the site today. Number 8. Caernarfon Castle. Caernarfon Castle is recognised around the world today as being one of the greatest buildings of the Middle Ages. The castle was born out of a bitter war with the Welsh princes. Edward I built many different fortifications across Wales to impose the power of the English monarchy on the Welsh. The site of the imposing castle wasn't chosen by accident. Previously it had been the location of a Norman motte and bailey, and the easy access to the sea made it an ideal spot for Edward I. In an attempt to tighten his grip on the Welsh, Edward would give his first son the title of the Prince of Wales in 1284, after his son was born at Caernarfon Castle. Most recently in 1969, the current Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, took his investiture here. The castle itself towers over the local town. Its imposing and impressive site would have been enough to put off any rebelling locals. Number 7. Bamburgh Castle. Sitting on the northeast coast of England in Northumberland is the remarkable Bamburgh Castle. Originally it was a location of a Celtic fort in the 5th century, but was passed quickly to the Anglo-Saxons. Later the fort here would be destroyed by the Vikings in 993, however the Normans would decide to build a new castle on this site. Unsuccessfully, it was besieged in 1095 by William II, but then it would become property of the reigning English monarch. During the Wars of the Roses, it would become the first castle in England to be defeated by artillery, following a 9-month siege of Richard Neville, also known as Warwick Kingmaker. Today the castle sits spectacularly overlooking the coast, and the castle seen today is a rather recent structure. If you visit today, you're sure to get some incredible views of the coast, but also guaranteed to see some fantastic artefacts and buildings. Number 6. Warwick Castle. Arguably one of England's most visited castles, a defensive castle or structure has stood in Warwick for almost 1,000 years. Built on the bend of the River Avon, Warwick Castle has a rich history intertwined with monarchy, sieges and extravagant owners. Its imposing structure makes for a fantastic day out. Inside the castle's walls are a number of tourist attractions such as a maze, falconry shows and a trebuchet which is usually fired. The structure of the castle is very impressive, featuring a huge barbican and gatehouse equipped with murder holes that would have acted as a brutal method of defence against invading troops. It also features a damp, dreary and terrifying dungeon which inside it contains an oubliette. This is a small hole in the ground which a prisoner would simply be left here to die or to be eaten by rats. The reputation of this particular oubliette even found its way back to the continent, with the French fearing it hugely. During the 17th and 18th century, it passed through the hands of the Greville family. This family were instrumental in transitioning the castle from a defensive structure to more of a palatial accommodation. Today it is operated by the Merlin family and attracts a huge number of visitors every year. When visiting, you can experience the whole of the castle too, and very little is off limits. If you do visit, take time to explore the incredible gardens, conservatory and mill too, as well as the great halls and bedrooms. Number 5. Stirling Castle. Located in Scotland, Stirling Castle is one of the biggest and most important castles in the whole of Scotland. It sits upon Castle Hill and is surrounded on 3 sides by steep cliffs, giving it a hugely strong defensive position. A castle stood on this site in the 12th century, however most of the buildings seen today date back from the 15th and 16th century. Before the union with England, it was one of the most popular Scottish royal residences. Many different Scottish kings and queens were crowned at Stirling, including the infamous Mary Queen of Scots, and also many Scottish monarchs were born here. The castle throughout its history has been sieged at least 8 times, with the last being in 1746 when Bonnie Prince Charlie attempted to take the castle. Allegedly in 1296, when Edward I invaded Scotland, beginning the Wars of Scottish Independence, the English found the castle abandoned and empty and began to occupy the site. Later, they were defeated and starved by the Scots. Almost all of the present buildings were constructed between 1490 and 1600. Stirling was developed into the principal royal centre by the Stuart kings, and renovation works to create a huge ornate palace fit for the monarchy were began. Today, if you are visiting central Scotland, a trip to Stirling Castle is imperative to walk in the footsteps of Mary Queen of Scots and many other Scottish monarchs. Number 4. The Tower of London. Possibly one of England's most famous castles, the Tower of London guards the River Thames and stands over England's capital as a reminder of the monarchy's power. Although today dwarfed by skyscrapers, it attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors every year who are hungry to find out about the executions and brutal torture in its history, which are ingrained within the castle's walls. Its recognisable white tower was built in 1078 and was initially resented as a symbol of oppression. Its link to English history is prominent, and it was besieged many times and raided also. It served a number of different purposes, acting as an armoury, treasury, the home to the Royal Mint, and also as a royal menagerie, housing a collection of exotic animals gifted to the monarchy. In the late 15th century, it was the scene of the Princes in the Tower mystery, and throughout the 16th and 17th century was a brutal prison. Many famous figures were held captive within the tower's walls, for example Sir Walter Raleigh and even Queen Elizabeth I herself. It is the site of a number of different cases of torture too, with common forms being the infamous rack, the scavenger's daughter, and also the use of the manacles. Guy Fawkes, one of the conspirators instrumental to the gunpowder plot, was tortured at the Tower of London using the brutal rack. Its most famous events revolve around the executions held within the tower's walls. Contrary to popular belief, before the 20th century, only 7 executions had occurred inside the tower, with executions mostly being carried out on Tower Hill, outside the castle's walls. Even during the First World War, 11 men were tried and executed by firing squad at the tower. During the Second World War, it was used as a prison to house Adolf Hitler's deputy Führer, Rudolf Hess, following his famous failed peace mission. Today the tower is a huge pull for visitors to London, and we recommend you yourselves investigate the fantastic Tower of London. Number 3. Corfe Castle. Standing above the village of Corfe on the Isle of Purbeck Peninsula is the incredible Corfe Castle. Built by William the Conqueror, the castle dates back to the 11th century and is one of the most visually spectacular fortifications in the whole of England. It was one of the first castles to be built partly from stone, and throughout history has undergone different structural changes. In the early 12th century, Henry I began the construction of the stone keep at Corfe. It was during the reign of King Stephen that Corfe Castle experienced a siege, and the castle's defences were able to withstand the pressure. Throughout the medieval era, many towers and buildings were added onto the castle, for example the Gloriette, built during the reign of King John. The castle remained a royal fortress until it was sold by Elizabeth I to her Lord Chancellor, Sir Christopher Hatton. During the English Civil War, the castle saw much action. It was a home of the Banks family who supported the king. During this time, a huge siege took place at Corfe by the Parliamentarian forces. It was in fact Lady Mary Banks who managed to successfully defend the castle during the initial siege. Later on, the castle was sieged again, and Lady Banks was defeated. However, there was a great deal of respect shown to Lady Banks for her efforts and resiliency. Following the Civil War, Parliament ordered the slighting of many fortifications and castles, and Corfe Castle was one of these unfortunate buildings. Much of Corfe today has been blown to bits by a large amount of explosives, and walking through the ruins, you cannot help but consider how much explosives it would have taken to cause such destruction. Every year, thousands of visitors flock to Corfe due to its beauty and how incredible the surroundings are. As a child, some of my most memorable moments of family holidays revolve around exploring the ruins of the remarkable castle, trying to piece together what the structure would have looked like hundreds of years ago. Number 2. Tintagel Castle. Recently, Tintagel Castle in North Cornwall has been featured in the media due to its new footbridge that has been built, which links up Tintagel Island to the mainland. The castle's mythology is linked with the legend of King Arthur. Geoffrey of Monmouth's history mentions Tintagel as the site of Arthur's conception, and the legend became extremely popular, spreading across Britain during the late medieval period. Although the legend of King Arthur is disputed, what cannot be disputed is the fortification that stands at Tintagel and also its beauty. A castle was built on the site by Richard I, Earl of Cornwall, who wanted to establish a connection with the Arthurian legends. Originally, the castle was built in an old-fashioned style to make the castle appear more ancient. Following Richard, the Earls of Cornwall who succeeded him were not interested in the castle. Parts of the castle's accommodation became used as a prison. The castle, however, began to fall into a state of disrepute, with the roof being removed from the Great Hall. Throughout the centuries, the castle became more ruinous, and much damage was caused from the erosion of the land that linked the castle to the mainland. Throughout the Victorian era, there became an increased fascination to the Arthurian legends and to the ruins of the castle that became a popular tourist destination. Throughout the 20th century, access was improved to the castle via the installation of a wooden bridge. Much of the charm of Tintagel Castle is due to its uniqueness as a castle. It's set in a stunning coastal environment which offers spectacular views and an incredible day out. Number 1. Dover Castle. Our number 1 castle you should visit in 2020 sits in the port town of Dover. Founded in the 11th century, Dover Castle has been described as the key to England due to its defensive importance throughout history. It's also the largest castle in the whole of England. For 9 centuries, it has acted as a gateway to the realm. When I visited, I was taken aback by the sheer size of the castle. It certainly takes more than one day to visit and see everything. From medieval tunnels to Second World War tunnels to a spectacular keep, it is an incredible place to visit. The site contains one of Dover's 2 Roman lighthouses, which would guide Roman vessels safely across the English Channel from mainland Europe. The lighthouse sits next to a Saxon church, which inside contains Crusader graffiti. During the reign of Henry II, the castle began to take its recognisable shape. The king almost spent 2/3 of his annual income on Dover Castle, signalling how important he believed placing a castle here would be. During the First Barons' War, the French king was invited to come and steal the English crown. However, he was unable to penetrate the castle, and the castle was successfully defended. In the 18th century, massive rebuilding work occurred at the castle during the Napoleonic Wars. The town of Dover would become a garrison town, and there was a need for more barracks and storerooms. The solution was the creation of a complex maze of tunnels 15 metres below the cliff top. During the Second World War, the tunnels were then converted into an air raid shelter and then a military command centre and an underground hospital. From the command centre, Admiral Sir Bertrand Ramsay directed the Dunkirk evacuation from his headquarters in the cliff tunnels at Dover Castle. The tunnels of Dover Castle were even used as a shelter for the regional seats of government in the event of a nuclear attack during the Cold War. The castle at Dover is an incredible structure, one that has managed to deter Napoleon and the Nazis from invading England. We hope you've enjoyed this video. If you recommend other castles for us to visit throughout the year, please comment down below. Thank you once again for watching The Untold Past. To support the channel, please subscribe. Thank you once again.